My name is Brian Murphy. I'm the president and creator of The Pursuit Coach, which is a web-based business development training program for technical professionals. I, myself, am a consulting engineer with 22 years of experience. I realized very early what I really enjoyed was the competition, bringing people like you and people like me together to win pursuits and win projects. I came down from Portland, Oregon. I do realize that I'm the one in the room with the accent. So if I say anything that you don't understand, let me know. I can't put an accent to it, but I can speak more slowly or enunciate better and clear that up, okay? You win some and you lose some. It's nothing original. But we all hear it after a pursuit, especially after a loss. I prefer something a little less fatalistic. You win some and you learn from all. Whether you win a pursuit or you lose a pursuit, there's active learning going on there that you can take to the next pursuit. So I begin with a standpoint of this in the BD world. There's no such thing as failure, only feedback. Now I'd ask you, why would this perspective be important? Failures are baggage. They build up. And when they build up, they create desperation and poor judgment. You find yourself, oh, we lost that last one. We really got to get this next one. That's not the mindset you want to go into for that next pursuit is we got to win this one because we lost the last one. When you win, you win. When you lose, and you move on. So ask yourself this, when do you debrief? Show of hands, do you debrief? Who debriefs after a win? Who debriefs after a loss? Who debriefs internally? Who debriefs with a client? Who doesn't really debrief at all? What are the two outcomes of any pursuit?
Win and loss.
Win and loss. What do we do conventionally? When we win, we celebrate, we negotiate, typically with the client. You know, there's negotiations in the contract, and then we start to generate. That's what we pursued the project for. Let's start billing. Let's start billing some hours. Let's get paid back for some of this. When we lose, we relegate or blame, as I said, implicitly or explicitly. We ruminate, we mope around, and then what I say is we interrogate. We go to the client, say, why did we lose? Why don't you like us? It's my contention, and what I'm going to talk about today, that approach is wrong. Debriefing with a client after a loss is the slowest path to long-term success. What we want to start focusing on is debriefing after a win. Now, we all have examples of how we debriefed after a loss, and it was the greatest thing in the world, and we learned so much, and it helped us out the next time. Why do you remember that? Who can tell me, raise your hand if you can tell me a detailed description of your last vacation. Who can tell me in a detailed format what they did for the last 10 weeks? What we do is we remember the exceptions. Our brains are wired to remember that exception. So when we debriefed after a loss and it somehow paid a benefit at the next benefit, we remember that and we make that the norm. What we forget is those things that happen on a day-to-day basis, or those debriefs that we probably didn't do but should have done. So we think, well, this time was successful, we should do that more often. And it becomes the norm, as opposed to debriefing after a win. Now, what I'm proposing to you today is a strategic approach to debriefing. That's to debrief in a manner that sets you up for long-term success, builds on what you do after a win, and looks forward, rather than looking backwards is what we typically do after a loss when we debrief. I want to look at this conventional approach a little differently. Remember right now back to your youth, or maybe for some, just last week. Think about that person that you found attractive, and you worked up the courage and the nerve to ask out. Then they promptly turned you down flat and selected somebody else. How did you feel? You don't have to share. Just think about how you felt. Now, did anybody say to that person that just turned them down anything like this? Thank you for your time. Do you think that in the next week or two, we could find time that you could tell me about my positives and my negatives and my approach and what you really thought about me? No. And why not? That person has selected somebody else. They have who they want. They're off doing their thing. They're happy as can be. You at that point, or at least in the business world, a nuisance, because you're taking up time for something that doesn't provide a benefit to that client. Now, think again back to that person that you found attractive and asked out and they said yes. Chances are, within a month's time, you're up to the early morning hours telling each other all the wonderful things that you like about one another. It's the same way with clients. When a client picks you, they like you. They want to spend time with you. They want to hear what you have to say. When they don't select you, they've heard what you had to say. They didn't like it. They don't want to hear anymore. The last thing that a client really wants is to have to take an hour, hour and a half, and go through the reasons they weren't selected and why they weren't as good as the team that they did select. They may do it, and when they do it, here's some of the things that we hear. Really, all the firms could have done the work. Everyone was qualified. You had a good team and experience. You put together a good quality proposal. Now, what I call these, based on the example I gave there, are it's not you, it's me examples. They're just being nice. There's nothing actionable here. Here's what I call the CYA excuse. Well, this is how the scores fell out. It rarely is scoring objective. It's a CYA. And this is, I don't care what you do, just leave me alone. You're welcome to come in and look at the other proposals if you want. And you go in, spend an hour, 2 hours, thumbing through the proposals, making some notes. You know, they got good graphics, they did this, they did that. But it doesn't give you any information as to what the client thought. There's nothing actionable here. You've wasted your time, and you've wasted the client's time. But don't worry, because it can get worse. The PM that was on our team for this pursuit that lost is now on to billable work on some other project that he's working on or she's working on. So what do? We send a representative, which is often, who's gone as a representative to debrief with a client? Any of you? I've worked with firms that have done that too. You guys have an invaluable role in pursuits. Your role is not to go as a representative to the client to find out what you did wrong on a losing pursuit. What reason do we give for this? What justification do we have for sending a representative? Well, if the PM was the reason we didn't get the project, the client might be more willing to talk to a third party. Let me make one thing clear. In the pursuit process on the debrief, we're here with this big yellow arrow at the end of the line. Now this line is something I developed called the anatomy of a pursuit. And we have all of this time up to the time we put a proposal together and send it to the client to determine if that PM is the correct PM for the project. If we find out over here somehow that the PM was the wrong person for the project and the client doesn't like them, that's on us. That's our fault. That should have been determined way back there in the green, yellow, and blue bars. The last thing you want to do is come here and debrief with a client and communicate to them that we had such a poor understanding of the project that we put the person in charge of this project as somebody that they didn't like or didn't think could do the job. That's not a message you want to leave with the client. Okay? And all these things, I wanted to point out, in my opinion, all these things have to happen in a pursuit. Your time scales may be different depending on the size of the pursuit, but all these things have to happen. Now I have a science question for you. If you take all this stuff and all this activity and you squeeze it down into that little space between the release of the RFP and the proposal, what happens? Pressure increases, temperature increases. That's what you see in the office. You take all that stuff, and all that stuff that should have been done months in advance all gets compressed in that little space of furious activity. Temperatures go up, activity goes up, stress level goes up, and what comes out the back end? Junk. All right? So let's go back to this. If this is the conventional approach to debriefing, how would you change this? How would you change what you do for a win? Is when you win, celebrate. It's important. You spend a lot of time on it. You should celebrate. Everybody comes into the conference room, has cake, champagne, and we celebrate. And then congratulate. Separate from the celebration. Even if it's people, management sticking their heads in somebody's office and saying, hey, good job on that pursuit. That was a good win. That doesn't always happen. We get on to the revenue generation. Then negotiate. Negotiation has to take place with the client because you want to sign the contract. And then investigate. Investigate. I specifically use the word investigate because it's different than interrogate. When we debrief after a loss, it typically turns into an interrogation. You want it to be an investigation. After a loss, reconciliate, come to terms with it, no blame, evaluate what you did wrong, and then find some way to innovate and change with that and come up with something new. 7 simple words to flip your debrief process. What was that?
You're suggesting that in the loss, don't talk to the client.
No. Words. After a loss, give them a grip and excuse yourself. You can call and say, hey, thanks for the opportunity to come and propose, and thanks for the information you provided us during the course of the pursuit. That's it. All right, I need 2 volunteers. There's no role play, and you won't even have to talk. I need 2. Okay, there's 1. Who else? There's 2. All right, I need a 3rd volunteer who doesn't really have to do anything at all. Thanks, Eric.
I'm in.
All right, I need you 2, was it Sarah and Lauren? I need you guys to go out by the registration table where you can't hear right now. And then Eric, I need you to stand by the door to call one of them in a minute.
No role playing.
No role playing. You won't even have to talk. No role playing, no talking, no acting out. Those are my pet peeves. I make a promise never to have to do those to other people. Now, what I want to demonstrate here, it's very quick and easy, and it answers your question is, why do you want to know how do you find out what you did wrong? When you fully make this flip in your debriefing strategy, you don't want to know what you did wrong. It doesn't matter. You want to find out what you did right. And what I want to demonstrate here is the quick way to do that. How asking the right questions at the right time with the right people gets you the information that you need. All right, so the first person I'm going to have come in here, and I don't care which one it is, Eric, I'm going to get them to come up here and stand next to me. And all I'm going to say is yes. I'm not saying anything else. No other instructions. All you need to do is sit there and watch. All right, call one of them in there. Yes.
I'm coming in to see what's the...
Yes. Yes.
Okay, what would you like me to do?
Yes.
Well, good. I'm married to an engineer. I can do awkward for a while.
Fair enough. We will stop there. Now I'm going to call. I'm going to call Sarah in, and I'm going to do just the opposite. All I'm going to say is no. No other direction other than no. Okay, call her in. No. 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 All right, have a seat, because that will prove my point. Now, when she walked in the door and all I gave her commands were yes, what did she do? She kept moving. We got her coming. We got her going in the right direction. We got her that far. But with Sarah, what did she do when I said no? Everything puckered up. And then the popcorn went to inappropriate places. When you're debriefing with a client, and when we debrief with a client, what happens is it's what was wrong. Even if we're asking what did we did right, our approach is really what wasn't right, what was wrong. And when we do that, you don't know what to do. You know what you did wrong, but you don't know where to go from there. Just like Sarah did. She walked in, I said no. She just froze. She didn't know what to do from that point. But when you flip that and debrief after a win, the whole thing is different. And it becomes, what did we do right? That's what you do next time. It's, you got to laser focus on what this client likes, what we need to do to win with them. We don't care what the vast array of issues are that didn't work or won't work. We want to know what did work. Yeah?
I have one question, though. If you have a project manager that is not liked, of course you don't know it at the time, but if they are not liked by the client, and you, of course, find it out after the fact, how do you deal with that?
That chart that I had up there, you should have found that out way at the beginning. That's why I said if you find out at the end, secondhand, that's on us. That's just bad homework. Our need to want to debrief with the client simply communicates that we didn't do our homework. There must be something else that we needed to know here that we missed. So when you go to debrief with a client, what you're really communicating to them is we're still doing our homework. We're still doing what we should have done much earlier in this process.
And you don't need to be telling the client that.
No, you don't need to be telling the client that at all. So, but you need to be asking those clients, just straight up with a client, who would be a good project manager for this? Or who don't you want as project manager for this? Those are okay to ask early on. Then you know. So why debrief after a win? Why should we debrief after a win? The client loves you. They want to talk to you. They're that date that said yes, that wants to talk into the wee hours of the morning about how wonderful they are and how wonderful you are. This is when you find out what you did right. You don't care what you did wrong. And I realize that's the contentious point, and it's our human nature to want to know what we did wrong. And it even goes back to the speaker this morning, the keynote speaker, our insecurities. We've got this giant voice in our head that's telling us and talking to us, well, we must have done something wrong. It must be us. What was that? I need them to validate what's wrong with me, so I'm going to go find out what I did wrong. I don't care. Find out what you did right, and then do that the next time. Exactly. Back, I'm going to borrow those, Eric. Back to this chart. If you're breaking in with a new client, where do you start? Back here. This is where you're finding out all your information. Before the project, when this is just a seed in the client's mind, what that project is, this is when you need to be acting. When the client's back here in this part of the graph, the client is going to give you so much information because they're not yet guarded. They're willing to give information. There aren't any restrictions on what they can tell you. So if you're with a new client, yeah, start way back there. But you're not, the reason is at that debrief, as I said, the client, if you've lost, they're on to better and brighter things. This time, you're not who they selected. So they'll be polite, often, sometimes not. Often they'll be polite, but they're not going to really give you any actionable information to what you can use next time. So the next project comes out, you lose this project, thank you very much, I'm glad we had a chance to propose. Identify the next project and get your people lined up to gather that information that you need the next time. You have the client's undivided attention. You're the one they selected. They want to hear from you. They want to know what you have to say. The client wants to talk to you. This is the time for that PM to start building rapport for the next project. So if you've got a PM and he's going to be working with this client for the next several months, the next several years, depending on the size of the project, don't start the relationship by sending a representative. Let's go back to our dating example. I asked somebody out for dinner, and I sent Eric in my place. Like, well, I realize this is the first date, but I was busy, so I sent Eric in my place. I'll be there for the second date. No, that's what you're communicating. You want that PM and their PM face-to-face, establishing and building rapport, especially with a brand new client. You want as much time as you can. If the PM wants to take someone along with him, someone from marketing so that someone else can hear what the client has to say, that's a good idea. You just don't send a representative that the client has never met by themselves to go try and get valuable information. Would you walk up to anyone at the conference here that you don't know and have never met and sit down and ask them personal information about themselves, as an example? Are you going to get any really meaningful, actionable? You might find out where they're from, how many kids they have, if they're married or something. But you're not going to get anything actionable. It's the same way with clients. So if you are debriefing with clients after a loss, I strongly recommend that you stop. And if you're not debriefing with clients after a win, I really strongly, strongly encourage you to start that.
I have a question.
Yes?
So if you have been developing a long relationship with a client, and is it generally perceived overall that from the client's perspective that it's somewhat negative? Reason being is that I've actually met with clients that I've known for years, and they've given me valuable information that I've been able to win the next project. So is it maybe that's a specific situation, or is it generally they look at it as a negative?
Exceptions.
Okay.
You have an exception. Everybody in this room has an exception as to how we debriefed after a loss and got valuable information. What I'm talking about is a broader strategic approach to debriefing with clients or not debriefing with clients after a pursuit. So yeah, if there are times that can happen, but as where are you going to spend your resources? You know, you're gonna spend them on that one time with that one client. So maybe it's a mix. Maybe when you lose a project with that one client, you go see him. When you lose a project with the other 9 clients, don't go see him. And it's not that we're just dropping the ball on this. We're going to talk about this in detail with an internal debrief. So what makes a successful debrief? And this is the questions that you ask. Do it while you're in the honeymoon phase. Don't do it after you've gotten into the blood and guts of the project, because you've gotten into the blood and guts of the project. And things go wrong on projects. You want to find out why they loved you when they loved you, not when they're tolerating you now. Things get worked out. Make it informal. Whether it's, let's go out to lunch, meet them at a conference. If there's a conference coming up, go out for coffee. Don't make it this formal, sit down, I need to come in and talk to you about the debriefing of our presentation because we selected you or you selected us and we realize you like us. Don't go with a checklist. Nothing says formal more than a checklist. I had a good example of this flying down here yesterday. When the flight attendant stands in the middle of that aisle and gives you instructions on what to do in an emergency, does anybody feel that they really care about your personal safety and your well-being? No, they're going through a checklist. That same flight, they were coming down the aisle I was flying from Houston to here. They were flying down the aisle trying to get us drinks. And I had my laptop open, and she slapped this glass in my hand. I said, could I just have the can? It's like, I've already poured it. I said, well, then I can't use this because I'm not going to spill it on my laptop, 45 minutes before I get to the site. It's like, well, we've got to keep on track. We don't have time. She was just going through a checklist. We got to get everybody served. Got to get them a cup. So don't go with a checklist. Just make it a conversation. Again, you don't have to sell anything at this point. They want to talk to you. just let the information flow. Let the conversation go where it wants to go. You can go with some things that you want to find out and, try to, again, as the keynote speaker talked about, you can be the guide in the back of the boat. Let the client take it downstream. You just, kind of guide it gently to where you want the conversation to go. I've been back and forth on this one about taking props. And it really depends on how close to the win you have this debrief with a client. The reason I like to take props like the proposal is if it's been a long time, it might help refresh their memory. The reason I don't like to take props is because I want to know what really stuck with them. Not what they see. It's like, oh yeah, I think we really like that, John or somebody really liked this section of the proposal. Even if it's only 3 things or 2 things, I want to know what really stuck in their heads after everything was over and done with. And focus on the positives and use presuppositions. Now by presuppositions, what I mean are statements that are in 2 parts. And our brain works in such a way that if the first part of the statement is accepted as true, then we assume the second part of the statement is true as well. Now that you're aware of that, watch TV commercials. A whole new light. But you can do that language pattern with clients too. And it could be something as simple as this. Well, if you really liked our approach on what we were doing here, I think you're really going to be interested in this here. It's like, well, no, I did really like that, so I do want to hear what you're going to do here. Or if you really like the team we put together on this proposal and this project, you're really going to like the team that we put together for the next project that you've got coming up. That already plants in the head. It's like, all right, we had a really good team here, so we're going to have a really good team on the next one too. Simple things like that help guide the client's thinking.
I expected this class to be quite different than it is. You hear it all the time. To always teach it. Oh, it's bad, it's bad, oh. This is new news to me. What about the SOQ? We're engineers, so in our case, we do the SOQ and we put it in. When we don't win it, like in our case, a local municipality, that we need to get in with them. And we're at their doorstep. They just need to know how big we are now. They need to know that we're double in size from 5 years ago. You don't recommend, after a loss, going in there and hearing reviews on the actual, I know normally it's not about the SOQ, but it is.
No, that should have all been said long before that debrief.
Yeah.
If the size that you are now is different than the size you were 5 years ago, the client should have known that. At the latest in the proposal of the SOQ, certainly should have been brought up multiple times before you ever got to that point.
Yeah.
So bringing it up, what is the mantra in every consulting office when you're in the midst of a pursuit and the proposal and the interview? Make it about the client. Make it about the client. Make it about the client. Have nightmares about making it about the client. And then when we go in to debrief after a loss, what does that communicate? It's all about us. What did we do wrong? Why are we so bad? Why were we insufficient somewhere in order to get this project? We go in just screaming, it's about us now. It makes the fact that you were trying to make it all about them seem insincere. So when you lose, accept your loss and be on your way. Now, there are many factors during the course of a pursuit that determine a win or a loss. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. The best that we can do is address as many as we can and minimize those that we can't address in some way, shape, or form. Now, sometimes, however, even a well-run pursuit suffers a substantial smackdown. You do everything right. You were out there 24 months in advance. We had everything out there. They love they're personal friends with our project manager, and then boom. Sorry, but we didn't select you for the project. In an event like that, in what seems to be a scorched landscape in your office of a loss and lost resources and upset management and upset PMs, and you can find some positives out of that. And that's what we want to talk about now. Now, if we apply that feedback philosophy, that there's no losses, there's only feedback, it flips what we're doing. And you can and should objectively evaluate each and every pursuit. But that's internally. We've been talking up to this point about what you do with the client externally. When you win, you go. When you lose, you stay. Now, whether you win or lose, you're having to sit down in the office to determine what went wrong, what went right. Because sometimes you're going to knock one out of the park. Sometimes you're going to get beaten badly. And sometimes it's just absolute dumb luck that you win or lose a project. And you need to know that. Because if you hit one out of the park, you want to repeat it. If you got beat, you want to know why you got beat. And ultimately, somehow, that's on us. And if you just got lucky, you want to know that too. Because you don't want to repeat what you did on the lucky win and assuming, well, then that just gives you bad data. I've got an example of that from my own practice. There was a client in Southern Oregon that we had an engineer that had a personal relationship with the engineering manager. He had been talking about this project with him for months. We met with the engineering manager. We met with the utility manager. We met with a council person. We met with the operations manager on 4 different occasions. We had been to the site. We knew the solution. We had talked to them about the solution. They had agreed that this was a good path to take for the solution to solve their problem. We put together this proposal that laser focused on the problem, what the solution was, and pointed out that they had already agreed that this was the solution and the pathway to take. One of our competitors, someone that I have a congenial relationship with, that we agreed it's not personal, it's just business. He didn't know if he was going to pursue this project until a week before it was due. And then during that week, he had some free time. He just threw everything together, just boilerplate stuff. He didn't know what the solution was, so he put everything in there. He happened to be in Southern Oregon the day that the decision was going to be made. So he thought, I'm down here, I might as well stop by the client and at least introduce myself, because he hadn't met the client yet. He introduced himself to the engineering manager, and they spoke for a half hour, 45 minutes, and he said, the selection that's going to the council tonight for approval, is there any reason I should stick around? And the engineering manager said, well, you don't have to, but it's a public meeting, so you can come if you want. Came back to the public meeting. The 4 individuals, technical individuals that we had met with on numerous occasions, went up in front of the council and said, really, we reviewed the proposals. They all seem to be good proposals. We think any of the firms could do it. And threw it in the laps of the council. And then the counselors said, well, is there anybody here that gave one of these, submitted one of these proposals? And Garrett's like, I'm here. And the head of the city council says, well, do you have anything you'd like to say to us? And being a good consultant, he said, well, yes, I do. And he stood up for an hour and spoke off the cuff on his proposal. And then the council said, well, seeing as no one else is here has anything else to say, we'll go ahead and give it to Garrett's firm. How can that be? We knew what the good was. I knew what the bad was now. It's like from that point on, any selection process, I was at the city council meeting no matter where it was. And the lucky for Garrett was he happened to be in the right place in the right time. The unlucky for us is we weren't in the same place he was. So you need to know that. He takes the approach, well, we'll just throw together something a week before the proposal's due, and that's an approach to winning. He's going to go out of business. And we need to know, hey, we need to be there. We dropped the ball at the very end, and I learned a valuable lesson. Now, the purpose of the internal debrief is to evaluate and assess how the team performed. It's not to lay blame. A loss is a loss is a loss. You can blame people. It doesn't do any good. Nothing's going to come with the blame except a bunch of bad feelings, unless it's a really, really bad loss. I haven't been involved in one of those where somebody loses their job over a loss. But it's just to evaluate so you can improve it for the next time. Sometimes after a win, we say, oh, we just don't really have the time to do that. Sometimes after a loss, we say, we just really don't have the time to do that internal debrief. Whatever your excuse is, you can't keep doing the same thing and expect to move ahead. Whether it's a win or a loss, you need to change something up for the next time and keep it original and keep it fresh. Maybe there's things that you can take from this one and apply it to a brand new client. The last firm I was with, we discovered a brand new approach to org charts that really communicated 4 or 5 pages worth of information in a single page, in a single graphic. And we got that from one of the pursuits that we did. What I want you to do is take a minute and write down the internal team from your last internal debrief. Just on the back of one of those sheets, who attended the last internal debrief on your pursuit? Win or lose? All right, now, could you or can you write anything down? Who could identify who that team was? Who could not? All right. Now, for those who could write it down, there's a difference between what you can write down and what is actually implemented. Who actually implements and has a formal internal debrief process with that team that you just wrote down? Who doesn't? Okay. I realize that this is going to change depending on the size of the pursuit, the size of your firm. I would have these people in the room for an internal debrief. The client service manager, the project manager, the pursuit manager, of which on large pursuits, I think there should be 2. A project manager is going to be busy on other other work, and can't effectively manage a pursuit, something that is non-billable and needs to be done on a very tight timeline. The pursuit manager is the person who manages that pursuit from start until selection. And in my opinion, there's absolutely no difference between a pursuit and a project except for when the contract comes in the process. In a pursuit, the contract comes at the end. A project, the contract comes at the start. The marketing manager, the proposal lead, if those are different people, and an independent internal reviewer. Now, most firms for significant projects will do a red team review for proposals and invite somebody in to review the proposal who's completely cold at it. But they don't do that for a debrief, an internal debrief after a loss. So if you just have these people who are intimately involved in the pursuit as it goes, and you don't have any outside perspective, you're really just listening to yourselves talk, and you're not really getting any good information out of it. It's very useful to bring in somebody who's completely cold on the pursuit and say, hey, review what we did. Internal debrief topics. Take another quick minute and write down the topics that you think should be covered in an internal debrief. Here's what I think should be addressed in an internal debrief. The pursuit lead time. That goes back to that colored chart that we talked about. Did you give yourself sufficient lead time, or was everything compacted into a very short time frame between the RFP and the proposal? Technical expertise applicability. Did you have, obviously, the right technical people on the team? Non-technical matchup. We always try to get people matched up technically. We spend very little time trying to match up personalities. Match up personalities, because the little secret is that personality matchup is more important than that technical matchup. The technical matchup has to be there. It's important. But if you have a technical matchup and they don't have any spark between them, that's not going anywhere. Interactions and interfacing. Where and when did you interact with the client leading up to that proposal? And how did you interface with them? Client analysis. In your handouts there, we'll talk quickly about a worksheet for that. How did you analyze the client? How do you know who it is you were talking to? If you don't do that, some people will say, well, it's kind of like just throwing darts at a dartboard. I say if you don't have a good, solid client analysis, It's like putting on a blindfold, walking into a hallway with multiple doors, finding the room with the dartboard, and then trying to hit the dartboard in the dark. You need to know who the audience is. Pursuit plan execution. That makes the assumption that you have a pursuit plan to begin this whole process, and then did you execute that plan? Appropriate assignment of staff. Not only from a technical standpoint, but did you have the bodies that you needed to get the work done? Quality of the proposal. This is usually the one that does get done. The message of the proposal. What was the message of the proposal? Integration of your proposal and the interview. These should really be seamless. You don't want a message in the proposal and a completely different message at the interview. These are things that go together. Interview practice. How did you practice? Where did you practice? When did you practice? The interview presentation, that's the one that most people, that one, and I said quality of the proposal, are the ones that usually constitute an internal debrief. Presenting and writing for multiple audiences. Not everyone in the audience processes information in the same way. And if you assume that everyone in the audience is a visual person and you make your proposal and your interview and your materials very visual, you're losing those that are auditory and those that are kinesthetic. You need to write across that full gamut. You need to know how to use language, how to prepare your materials, and how to conduct the interview so that you are engaging all those people across all three of those modalities. What do you think the key to this process is? This whole internal debrief process, what's the key? What do we all tell our kids they have to be? I want you to be blank with me no matter how bad the news is. Honest, honesty. You got to be honest in this process, because if you're not honest, that's what the outsider brings to it, the internal, external person, is you need to be honest. Now, in light of that, what keeps the process honest? What keeps people honest? Documentation. Document what you do, and then the honesty will flow in that external debrief. And let me ask you, do you have documentation of your pursuit process? Are those used throughout the process? Good answer. Thank you for that honest answer. So if you don't document, it's just all what people remember. And what is it about this great little brain of ours that we use to get us through our daily lives safely? It's an incredibly poor for detailed memory. Now, if you talk about a pursuit and you're 2, 3, in that example I gave, you may be 12 months away from the start, you don't remember what you did. You can't piece it together. What you're going to do is you're going to insert, you're going to delete, and you're going to distort what you do remember, and that's going to be based on your impression, not intentionally, it's just the way it happens. And 2 months, 2 years down the road, you're not going to remember the details you need to remember. So here's some documents that I think that you need, and they're in your handouts here. The first is this project pursuit internal debrief evaluation. This is the form that you bring to the meeting in order to go through and document what you've done. And I outline there just what I had on that bullet point list, the things that you need to talk about during this meeting. Here's the anatomy of a pursuit. You can sit down and look at this and say, did we do all these things? Did we do them in a fashion and far enough ahead of the proposal and the RFP to put us in a position to really win this project? Or as I said, did we squeeze everything into here? Now, if everybody's angry and doesn't want to have an internal debrief, chances are that question's answered. You squeezed everybody in because nobody wants to spend any more time together. Tracking decision maker contacts. I know people have CRM software and all that stuff. Quite frankly, I don't think it's necessary, and I've been to small firms, to large firms. I rarely see it work in the engineering field because engineers don't want to input data for marketing stuff. It doesn't happen. So you spend a lot of money, and it's not necessary. So I've laid out something visual here so you don't have to read a bunch of text. It puts together the the org chart for the project, for the pursuit. It lists the firm's staff over on the side there and color codes them. When somebody has a meeting, you put a block. Who they had the meeting with, how many meetings they had with that person as the time goes by. It identifies who are the decision makers and who are the decision influencers. And you have time at that point, in a glance, you can see where the holes are. Activity tracking spreadsheet. This lays out for the schedule for the whole pursuit. Where are you going to meet with clients? How are you going to meet with clients? Who's going to meet with clients? And what happened? You can put notes in there. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. What happened? A quick note at what happened at that interchange. A client meeting prep and follow-up worksheet. Now, I don't recommend young engineers are taught to do this. Always prep before your meeting and put down a list of questions that you want to go through and information you want to find out. It turns into a checklist, and it turns into an interrogation. These are valuable if they're done before each meeting in the office to give yourself an indication or a direction that you want the meeting to go, what you want to find out, what's an acceptable outcome, what's the desired outcome. It lays out a path that you generally want to follow. An example is, I can guarantee you my notes on here are probably only 50-50 is what I've actually said today. They're just something to jog your memory. This is the client staff analysis. This is, again, is a whole nother topic, but what this lays out is how they communicate, what their working style is, who's the best match from your staff, who's the best staff technical match, do they support you, are they a detractor, are you getting adequate face time, and then it lays out red flags for weaknesses in your approach. And then a strategy pursuit worksheet. Done at the beginning, modified as you go through the pursuit. This is what we're going to do. This is our plan. And in a couple months, we'll come back and modify this as it goes. This is what I prefer to a go, no-go sheet. I hate go, no-go sheets because my experience, they all have scores attached to them. What did we talk about before? Well, this is how the scores fell out. This is what we have to do. Scores can be manipulated. I found go, no-go decisions around a scoring sheet to be just absolutely useless. We either wanted to pursue it or we didn't. And if we wanted to, we can make the scores match up and come up with justifications why we want to. So in your internal debrief, this is what you should be coming out of that with. What do we need to improve? What do we need to build on? Where did we get lucky? And how do we make sure that it's covered the next time? After all this, quickly, implementation is the next step. This is how I define implementation. Implementation is what good firms do to become great. In poorly performing firms, it's where good ideas go to die. You have to have implementation of this whole process, otherwise what's the point? And these are the questions that your implementation plan should answer. Who's responsible for implementation? To whom are the findings communicated? How are the findings communicated? Who's responsible for communication? And who's responsible for follow-up? You can go through this whole internal debrief process. You can have all the documentation. And then if nothing happens afterwards, what was the point? I equate business development and pursuits to golf. There's no such thing as perfection. There's only progress. With each round, you'll identify weaknesses and strengths, build on the strengths, and find a way to fix the weaknesses. And that's done internally. The only way that we can improve is to be honest and identify those strengths and weaknesses. So back to our original question, to debrief or not to debrief? Yes, you should. Probably just not the way that you've been doing. I will leave you with this from The Art of War. Strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Everything needs to be built into a holistic strategy of why you're doing it, not individual pursuits that we hope we can string together and keep the doors open. That's what the successful firms do. That's what the struggling firms don't do. Evaluation forms are at your chair. If this is my debrief, I'd like to know what I did right so I can build on it. Thanks very much for coming. I appreciate it.